Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our weekly Hebrew word study. And we are in the book of Judges, chapter 12. And what I'd like you to look at here is the map that you see on the screen in front of you. And as you remember, when we wrapped up chapter 11 last week, there was a very disturbing story about a man named Jephthah and his daughter, and uh, seemingly dire circumstances and outcome of what her life could have happened to become, but yet feeling that she was dedicated to the service in the temple, in the tabernacle. So, if you look at the map, I'm circling the name of Jephthah with the cursor here. He is in the tribe of Gad on the east side of the Jordan River. And today, the first part of the story is going to involve Jephthah and an interaction with the tribe of Ephraim. And if you look over to the left, down a little ways, you'll see a light mauve purple color. And I'm circling with my cursor here, and that is Ephraim. And look how far away Jephthah is from Ephraim. And keep that in mind as we go into the story and see what kind of beef, actually, the Ephraimites have with Jephthah. So if we start in verse 1. It says, "The men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, went northward, and said to Jephthah, 'Why did you not invite us to the party? Why um, did you not come and call us to go with you?' And they're so angry at him that they want to burn his house upon thee with fire." This is somewhat of an indicator of where the term to be fired comes from. It gained more momentum in the Middle Ages when people's houses, when they wanted to get rid of them, they would burn them in their houses or burn their houses down. And so the term of getting fired or getting removed from the situation, getting rid of, has its roots here in Judges chapter 12, verse 1. So Jephthah said unto them, My people and were at great strife with the children of Ammon, and when I called you, you didn't come to help me. So he's saying, I tried this once. I came to you, and you didn't come and help me. Now, what's interesting here is we can't find this episode being recorded where Jephthah ever went to the Ephraimites. We do look back in chapter 8, and we find the Ephraimites came to our judge or hero Gideon at the time and pretty much approached him with the same type of message. Remember, Gideon used his small army of 300 to defeat, and God used them to defeat the enemy. And the Ephraimites came to Gideon and said, "Why didn't you invite us to the party?" Well, he was able to pacify them and take care of things. Uh, we'll see if Jephthah here has the same um, charismatic or diplomatic ability to pacify them. So, verse 3, it picks up that Jephthah starts pleading his case to the Ephraimites and said, "You didn't come and deliver me, so I just took matters in my life in my own hands, went over against the children of Ammon." And he kind of deflects from his own abilities by saying, "The Lord," and you'll see this is capitalized Lord, and that would signify that the term is Yahweh in Hebrew, meaning the merciful, compassionate attributes of God were in Jephthah's favor, and so the Lord delivered him. And so he's saying, this is something that God did. This is God's doing, God's miracle. God delivered them. It wasn't anything that I did. And so why are you having a spat against me? Well, it seems that that didn't work very well. Verse 4 says that Jephthah gathered all the men together of Gilead, and there was a fight. Now, remember, these are tribes of Israel fighting against one another, brothers fighting against brothers. And you will see that a few times in the Bible. It is never a good thing. It never has a good outcome. It's like a civil war, and it was never what God intended to occur, but it just shows you how far away they have gotten from what God wanted them to be. And here, even though the Ephraimites were the bigger tribe, um, history tells us that they were the better equipped fighting people. They were more warlike. They had everything going in their favor. It would appear again that God was with the men of Gilead and they smote Ephraim. And it was all based upon this little phrase here in verse 4. It says, that the Ephraimites were kind of taunting them, saying, "You Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim from among the Ephraimites and among the Massaites." So Ephraim and Manasseh were the two children of Joseph, and they were given a split kingdom, two kingdoms, in exchange for Joseph not getting a tribe or kingdom. And so that's the significance here. And so, what is a fugitive? We look at the Hebrew, and here the word fugitive doesn't have any negative connotation about it. It just says like an escaped one, someone who is fleeing. Well, why was that such a bad thing? Why did it get them all up in arms? The commentators, Jewish commentators, make a note here that what this meant in their day and time is that the Ephraimites were saying that the most valiant soldier in the area, in the um, army of Gilead, was not even good enough to compare to the most cowardly of the Ephraimites. And that's what that word fugitive supposedly means here, that even one who runs away from the battle, being an Ephraimite and is a deserter or a coward, that even the most valiant men of Gilead are much better. The Ephraimites are much better than the best men of Gilead. So this is a real slam to them, and it caused them to break out into war, and it looks like the Gileadites are overcoming the Ephraimites. And what's interesting here is that we see some cultural things taking place. We see that there were some um, accents and dialect differences that were forming already by the way they isolated themselves in their little areas. So let's look again at here's where Ephraim is, here's where Manasseh, East Manasseh, they're way up at the northern side. West Manasseh's over here. Ephraim's down in this area. And so what they're saying and alluding to here is that some speech accents, dialects were already being formed, and that there was a word that they used to find out who they were because the Ephraimites could not create an SH sound. And so they said, let's take this word shibboleth and try to have an Ephraimite say it. And the Ephraimites could not make the SH sound. And so what would come out would be a sibboleth sound. And that shows up pretty interesting in the Hebrew because it's actually a different letter. So in the Hebrew, there's this looks like a W, but it's really called a sheen, gives you the SH sound, where down here for the sibboleth is uh, the letter of a samic, which has a normal S sound, the way we would pronounce it in English rather than SH sound. So the word was spelled completely different. It kind of meant the same thing, but it was a test that they could find out who could pronounce this. If you could pronounce the SH sound, you were good to go. If you made it sound like an S, it was pretty much a death sentence because at that time, 42,000 fighting men could not pronounce the SH sound, which is kind of interesting. It would be kind of like, as I'm learning Spanish, one of the things that are most difficult for me to do is to roll my R's. And Spanish-speaking native people can roll their R's very fluently. I struggle all the time rolling my R's. And it just shows the interesting thing about languages. It reminds me of something that happened during World War II. Many Americans who had German ancestry were had known German and were taught German, and they infiltrated Germany as spies to try to learn what was going on. And one of the ways that the true Germans would when they caught a spy and felt that he was being accused of being a spy, they would put him into a pressure situation where he would have to count numbers and do multiplication. And it was one of the ways that they could tell that someone who had grown up with English as their first and primary language under a pressure situation would revert back to counting in English, whereas a true native-born German who learned how to count in German as a child would be able to count in German under a pressure situation. So just interesting things about languages and what we revert to. I had heard a story about a man who spoke 7 different languages, but he said when he hit his thumb with a hammer, the words that came out of his mouth were always in his to express his pain and dismay. His curse words were always in um, his native language, and that was uh, a study that was done to show us that when we're in work situations and pressure situations, we always revert back to our native style of management, and how it's trying to teach us that to watch for that, that when we get pushed into those tough situations, we revert back in management to high control rather than, we'll talk teamwork and team building and all of those things. But when things get really tough and the red ink is flowing and things are not going well, most businesses will revert back to high pressure, high control, high domination. And so it's just one of those things that happen when we're put in those situations. So they had a fight. They took many lives. And after that, we never hear again of Ephraim ever being a problem. This obviously took them down a few notches, humbled them, and they never again raised their head in defiance of their brothers. So we see that Jephthah, after that, served Israel 6 years and he died. He was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. And now we finish out the chapter with some kind of strange occurrences of the judges. And the next one is a guy named Ibzan of Bethlehem. So we're going to go back at the map, look at that. Bethlehem is down in this area. It is of Judah, and here is the guy named Ibzan in Bethlehem area. So what did this guy do notable? Well, he was very prolific. He had 30 sons and he had 30 daughters. Now, this is not the first time you've heard this. In chapter 10, just a few chapters ago, there was a guy named Yair who had 30 sons, and he put them on 30 donkeys, and they ruled over supposedly 30 cities or 30 tent Bedouin communities. Well, what's this big thing with 30? What's the whole deal here? um, and what he did. So he had 30 sons and 30 daughters. That adds up to 60. And he took these 30 daughters and made them tools, if you would, to go abroad for his sons, which meant he married them off to prominent and powerful people in surrounding areas, in pagan areas. And he was trying to undoubtedly set himself up as a permanent ruler, maybe even a king, that he was trying to get his daughters to form and to marry into these other powerful nations. Thereby, they would form an alliance. It was something very commonly done because you pretty much would be assured that your daughter's family would not fight against you and that you would have peace between them, because that would just be fighting against the family clan. And then, so he judged Israel for 7 years, and that was it. Again, hard to understand why that was such a um, incredibly, how do you get 30 sons and 30 daughters? How many wives do you have? And what kind of wealth do you have to be able to support them? And what's your mindset? He obviously didn't do anything good, because he gets one line about his big family and in 7 years, and then he died and was buried in Bethlehem. Well, after that starts the reign of another guy named Elon. He was a Zebulunite. Let's see where he is on the map. So we see that Zebulun is way up in the northern part. It's landlocked little tribe, and right in the middle here, not too big, he gets noted. And what does he do? It says he judged Israel 10 years and then he died. So there is nothing noteworthy that he did. Um, Obviously, he didn't have his children and didn't do, anything with them that was noteworthy. Again, very sad to think that somebody can be in office and rule for 10 years and didn't do anything that was memorable in a biblical sense. And then we get to the last guy, Abdon, in verse 13. So let's look where he is at on the map. He was a son of Hillel. Abdon, we see that he is right here in Ephraim. So Ephraim comes back in the picture again. Remember, they were the warlike people. They got defeated by Jephthah, but somehow they're rearranged their strategy. And so now they're back in the situation again. You'll see this name. He's a son of Hillel. Hillel, if you study Jewish history, is a very prominent teacher. Not at this time, but in the future, there'll be a Hillel that is a prominent teacher just before the time that Jesus was born. And that Hillel had a grandson, again, not this one, but the next one coming up, whose name was Gamaliel, who was the teacher for Paul. And so this is interesting that this name has its roots way back here in Judges and had been passed on through many different lineages up until the time of Jesus. So here was Abdon. He judged Israel. Um, he didn't want to be outdone by the guy who had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He had 40 sons and 30 nephews. Now, the word nephew here is really in the Bible very difficult to define. You will find some translations will call it grandchildren. So think about this. If he had 40 sons who had 30 grandchildren, male grandchildren, and he got 70 donkeys for them to ride on, so they had to be fairly old enough to ride a donkey on their own. This was quite a period of time that would pass, at least, 20 years for your how long does it take you to have 40 sons? By how many wives? It could take you 20 years to have that many. And then they would have to have children and for them to be old enough to ride on a donkey. But yet he was only a judge for 8 years. So he was planning, he was scheming. He had things going on for quite a long period of time that he was wanting to be in prominence, to have influence, and then when the time was right, he moved in to be a judge for 8 years. But again, nothing noteworthy about only how many kids he had, which again speaks to the side that he was not a humble man. He did not take a low um, road of humility of not being prominent. Quite the opposite. The fact that he was able to take care of 40 children, having wives and households, showed that he was a man of excess, a man who lived very high and mighty, if you will, really thought a lot of himself, spent money in foolish ways, or he would not have had houses and families this large. And so his mind was not on godly things; it was on making a name for himself, and felt that he would do it through having a large family. But again, he gets one line telling us in the Bible that he had big family and nothing else notable about that. And as we know, this now ends the chapter 12 in Judges. It takes us to a place where you just kind of shake your head and wonder what life was all about back then and where the spiritual side of things were and how God must have felt about all of this. That even though there were these judges, there were times that appear that God worked in their lives. This was definitely not what God was hoping for, not what God was wanting to work out. And but we know that there's more judges coming, and we'll have to watch to see what their relationship with God is like versus what these three men had in their relationship with God. So, hope you enjoyed that little study. Stay tuned. Next week, we'll come back and go into chapter 13. God bless you all, and hope you have just a wonderful rest of your week. Bye bye.